Hey folks, welcome to Money and Politics, and today we're doing a little bit special. We're welcoming Rebecca to our broadcast, and many of you investors in Humbl will know Rebecca from Twitter. We'll just refer to as lovingly as Rebecca Humbl. How's that? And we'll be talking about investing in Humbl. And since Rebecca is so often posting on Twitter, and I like to get the viewpoints of other Humbl investors when we talk about the company. So, Rebecca, welcome to Money and
Thank
Politics.
you. Good to be here.
And you're coming to us from Georgia. Let's just start with how long have you been a Humbl investor and what attracted you to the company?
Well, initially, this was back in November. I had coming out of the J.C. Penney stock, which was a complete disaster. And I was talking to a buddy of mine, wondering what play to do next. His name's Eric, good friend of mine. And he's like, well, people really like Tesoro, TSNP. So I'm like, all right, why not? So I threw some money in there. And then I started researching, doing my own due diligence, and quickly became obsessed with this stock, talking with people, reading, studying from like 7 in the morning until sometimes 1 in the morning throughout the day. And the more I learned, the more fascinated I became. And it was just like this Sherlockian moment of seeing all the different pieces of the puzzle globally. Because the three hottest sectors to me were blockchain, fintech, and crypto. And Humbl is all of those things. And I use PayPal all the time, and I use social media a lot. So I absolutely loved the idea of everything being in one app. And I also loved the idea of the empowerment part of it. I have spent my life advocating for students with disabilities and working with the elderly population. And I come from a long line of entrepreneurs, so I love small business. So the idea of a street vendor across the world being able to suddenly explode their business because they now have a new methodology for interacting and transacting business was really exciting to me. And so I have to believe in the leadership. So I love Brian Foote. I think he's amazing. I think he's out for the little guy, and I am too. I really, whenever I go out to eat or whenever I travel, I typically go to the mom and pops, and I support local. And so I just like the artisan aspect of Humbl and how it's the little person who's being elevated and not big business. So that's just one of many reasons.
When you've invested, I mean, I have said on camera that I typically don't invest in penny stocks. Now, a friend of mine brought this to in fact, when he first brought it to my attention, I'm like, go away, little boy, I don't do penny stocks. But fortunately, he convinced me otherwise, and I kind of dabbled in it, and then as I went along, got to know the story more, and then thought the story made sense, which is why I have also said I don't look at Humbl as a penny stock. It could have started in a more traditional going to market route as a IPO and maybe come out at $20 or $15 a share, something like that. Because I think it's both good and bad the way it came out. It came out faster, it did it cheaper. And but one of the problems is so many of the investors, I think, are penny stock investors. As I said, I'm not, and they have a get rich quick mentality, as if it's supposed to go, now that I've put my money in at 20 cents, it's supposed to go to $5 right now,
Right.
And I'm supposed to be able
to
make 50 grand or 100 grand this month. And that's not investing, that's gambling. So you had some people who are poo-pooing the stock because they have a gambler's mentality instead of an investor's mentality. To that end, have you traditionally been a penny stock investor yourself, or a traditional investor, or what kind of sensibility are you bringing to the table?
Definitely a traditional investor. The J.C. Penney stock was the first time I had gotten involved in an OTC stock. And I only got involved with that because I thought for sure it was going to come out of bankruptcy. And it didn't. I personally like the penny stock aspect of this position because I was able to get so much of it. So when it goes to the NASDAQ, which will be sometime this year, I'll be doing very well for myself, as will my kids who are also invested.
And of course, we're speculating, we should say, just for those who don't know, that it would be sometime this year. It might be,
True.
it might be some other, it might be next year. We don't know. But that said, are you still encouraged? Have you been discouraged from the reverse split? If you're encouraged, what is it that you still find so promising, would you say, as you look into the future and the future of what Humbl might be able to achieve?
I'm encouraged because currently the only super app is in Asia. We don't have one in this country. So because I work with college students 5 days a week, I know they do want things simpler. They're all about the tech, and so to have one app, one click, and to have a marketplace and to be able to pay and to be able to socially share and to review, and the maps function. I love Google Maps. So I love that maps would also be there. So I just love having everything in one app, and I know that the college students are going to love it, and I just think it's going to really take off. PayPal isn't doing that, and PayPal isn't blockchain. I posted this really great article by Forbes about decentralization, and PayPal is not decentralized, and Humbl will be. So I just like taking out the middleman and the financial democracy of empowering people globally with the opportunity to be their own bank.
When you talk based upon what you just said, it's one of the things I've often said to people. Number one, you ought to be investing, and I don't care if you put like Humbl right now as we speak. I don't have the exact prices, in the neighborhood of $1.50. $1.45, $1.50. I don't care if you buy 10 shares for $14. The fact is that $14 will be an education for you to watch the stock price. You're not going to watch the stock price if you don't have any skin in the game. And people should learn to invest because, as I've often said, 90% of learning is emotional, not intellectual. And you're not going to have an emotional experience if you don't have money on the table. So it's not about, well, I only got $14. That's fine. Treat $14 as if it's a college tuition on a learning how to invest, and just watching the stock price and how it goes up and down. So that's one thing. But the other thing is what you were saying is that look how much we learned. Blockchain technology and the fact that it wasn't on my mind that countries around the world didn't have the financial infrastructure. As Brian Foote said in the last investor call, something like 70 to 100 countries around the world are still doing their transactions in their economy predominantly through cash. Well, how many of us walk around with $1,000 in our pocket? When you're doing with cash, I might walk around with $25 in my pocket, but either with credit cards or debit cards, we don't need that much cash. If you do, and if you live in an economy where maybe they have a higher crime rate than us, you can see how that would be an inhibitor to an economy because people don't want to walk around with a lot of cash on them. So therefore, they don't go out and buy as much as they would if either they didn't have to have cash or if they were in a better environment. So I think that's where Humbl, with earning a transaction fee, in that way they're partly like Visa, and they're going to be having this app around the world. In other ways, they are like Charles Schwab or E-Trade or whatever, because they're getting the investments right now of ETXs, and I think that could expand into other equity positions. So I think there's a great opening there for the future. And then, of course, Tickery, which they said, which it's one of those things I never thought about. How many times do you buy a ticket? If you think about going to a rock concert, which I've gone to, but it's not a frequent thing. But how many times if you're in a city, you get a ticket for a bus? Do you get a ticket for a subway? Do you have to have a ticket for an airline? If all of a sudden you could be buying all of those tickets through the Humbl app, and that ticketing is apparently, according to what Brian said, $100 billion a year business globally. If we got a half of 1% of the total market, a half of 1% would be $500 million a year. So again, that's another really incredible growth potential. And I tell people, you're buying a company, not a stock price. Stock prices go up and down often for no reason connected to the company. And I don't mean to be pontificating, but they go up and down maybe because of what's happened politically, or maybe because Bitcoin goes down, and then in sympathy, other blockchain technology stocks go down. It might not have anything to do with the particular company you're invested in. Those are buying opportunities. But that said,
I also think a huge part is the foreign exchange. Like, I love the idea of going to a foreign country and not having to get a currency that I'm going to come back with a bunch of it that I'm never going to be able to use again. I think that's really appealing as well.
Yeah, and as you know, I said, it's been a while since I've traveled, but sometimes you go to the train station to transact. When I was doing it, traveler's checks, American traveler's checks into whatever the local currency was, and you didn't get a good exchange rate at the train station as you would at a bank, but you needed the money. Having, as you say, the app where you can just do a transaction, or if I'm in France, be buying things just in a local currency and not have to carry all that money around. The moment you land, you've got a way of buying.
A way of buying and a way of having trusted merchants, because it's kind of scary. You're worried about getting ripped off. Sometimes you can go grab a taxi and maybe they'll travel 10 times around the block when it's just right down the street. So having that, being able to discover Humbl merchants that have been verified and that are trusted is really reassuring as a traveler.
Let's talk just briefly. How often do you tweet? How long have you been on Twitter? And are you surprised at your fame within the Humbl family?
I'm really surprised by it. I kind of make a living running my mouth because I'm a closed captionist, so I have to talk a lot. And when I'm passionate about something, I like to tell people about it. And so I just really enjoy talking about how great this company is and throwing in a cute graphic, and the community is just fantastic. It's like a little family. We're going to have so much fun at that shareholder conference. It's going to be a family reunion. It's going to be really fantastic because there's something about bonding over getting together on something that's never been done before. The very first American super app, and it's just really exciting.
Yeah, before I bought Cisco and I've never interacted with fellow investors ever. It's a individual decision. You buy stock and that's the end of it. Because of YouTube and Twitter and the way we interact, it does really seem like there's kind of a growing family. And as you may have seen, I've interviewed Scott down in Atlanta, who I guess is not too far from where you are. You're both in Georgia. But I interviewed him a couple of times. And, the other thing which is remarkable, I say this having worked in television, we used to always have to carry our camera gear and be in the same room with someone we're talking to, interviewing. Whereas here we don't. Plus, you and I have communicated through Twitter, but now that we see each other, it almost emotionally feels like you've visited the other person, doesn't it? It's kind of a funny thing.
It's true. It's true. The Humbl Nation is very real. It's a phenomenon. It's really, really exciting.
What do you know? Speaking of, I think it's in December, the investor conference, or what are we calling it? But I don't know a whole lot about that. I guess it's going to be out in San Diego, where the Humbl is headquartered, sometime in December. I guess we just get together at some gathering spot and socialize. Is that what your understanding is?
Yes, and Brian's words, he wants to have a beer with all of us. And he did mention he was going to have some big name entertainment, so that's going to be exciting. I think it's going to be really great. I just think everyone wants to meet each other, because it's been a journey. We've all been stuck at home during COVID, and so I think that the sense of connection is really there. And I think that's another cool thing about the app is, it's a global digital economy, and we're all going to be able to connect with merchants across the world that we ordinarily and otherwise wouldn't have been able to connect with. And that's really exciting.
I didn't, I'm always guilty of keeping people longer than I said, but the other thing we haven't talked about is that this is also going to be almost like a little bit like I said, it's a little bit like PayPal, it's a little bit like Visa, it's a little bit like Schwab, but it's also that we can have, if you've traveled abroad, you go and maybe you buy some wood carving someplace or a painting someplace, and you bring it back as a souvenir of your trip to Europe or South America or something. But now with Humbl and the merchants, you could have that same person down in Bogota making pottery, and you could look at it, order it, and all of a sudden that little guy who had to rely on the tourist trade could be selling his pottery to Canada, the United States, England.
Absolutely.
And it's really going to open up a global marketplace that is benefiting not only Humbl and the Humbl investors, but all of those small merchants across the world.
Absolutely. It takes out the middleman. It's a financial democracy at its best. I think the piece that's most exciting to me and where I think we have the competitive edge over PayPal is the trillions that go over the border, sending money back and forth to each other. PayPal charges 5% for that, and it takes days to settle that money. My international clients hate it. Whereas with Humbl, it's going to be instant and at 1%. I mean, there's a huge difference between 1% and 5%.
Well, you look at some of the Mexican immigrants sending money back to Mexico, and they use Western Union, I've been told, charge something like 8 to 10%. So if you're sending $1,000 back home, you got to pay $80 to $100 in fees instead of $10 at a 1% rate. So yeah, there's so many layers to this. When people ask, well, let me have you answer. When people ask you, well, what is it Humbl does? I know I have a hard time, answering in less than about 3 to 5 minutes.
It's hard. Yeah. I think it is, I just try to point out the three pieces: the marketplace, the investing, and then the payment part of it. I think Humbl's put out a lot of really great graphics that say, 1,000 words on a picture. So I always try to attach some kind of graphic with my tweets that I put out there. But I think my favorite part is you send the money and then you can instantly review. Well, businesses are going to love that because they try to incentivize you to post about them and post a Google review or to go on TripAdvisor. Well, you're not going to have to remember to do that when you get home because right there, instantly on your phone, you can just pay, review, and share it with your friends. So I think it's going to be free marketing for a lot of businesses.
Yeah, and that way it's also like Yelp, isn't it? That you get so it's really so many different functions in it. So we'll have to see. I don't know as I tell people, what the stock price is going to be the next day or the next week. I think we need to be looking at the stock price, I would argue, in terms of 6-month increments. There was someone else I was listening to today, it was, I think, well said, that the professionals, and this is something I often say when you listen to CNBC or Fox Business News and they have investors on and they go, well, we like XYZ stock. I always want to say to the TV, over what holding period? Sometimes these guys are talking about we like it for the next month or, the next week, or we think when the earnings come out, we're going to get a bump. I'm holding Humbl for 3 to 5 years. I think people ought to judge the company, especially right now, in terms of hold it for at least till the end of the year, because the company was only born basically in December and didn't get running until January, practically speaking. And by the way, in a recent tweet, I think just about a week ago, Brian Foote said, we're looking at acquisitions and you just reminded me there was 3 vertical markets he was, Humbl is in, and he's looking at other acquisitions within that. So we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what's coming up, and that there could be an announcement never about an acquisition again, or it could happen tomorrow or the day after or next month. So when you're in a brand new business like this, as I say, this is not Coca-Cola. This is not some old, staid, stagnant business. It's very dynamic, very changing. It's also not a lemonade stand on the corner. It is a global powerhouse, and once they have their app really nailed down, it's a work in progress. I often say to people, holding up a Visa card, how many transactions do you think Visa is doing right now around the world? And people go, oh my God. I mean, they get the idea. It's like, oh my God, it's hard to say. How many transactions once we have the global app for Humbl out will everyone be doing in the millions every single day? And those
Absolutely.
small fees will add up in a year's time to a massive amount in revenues, in addition to the other things they do with the ETXs and ticketing. Anyway,
the ETXs are huge. You know, if you consider a strong IRA gets you 7%, and we're hearing people report percentages of 20% or better. So I'm looking forward to finding out about those.
They've been getting that in like a week.
Right. I mean, yeah.
You know, it's only been out in the United States for what, maybe 3 weeks or so. And I know Scott, I think, said he was up like 20%. I haven't gone from memory, but I'm interested to see how that pans out going forward. But certainly the returns have been incredible. One of them, and I don't remember which block it is, was up like 2,000% in the last 12 months. So
right. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Exciting stuff.
Before we close out, I'll let you have the last word. If you want something else in closing, you want people to follow you on Twitter. Let me bring that up again. You're at Rebecca Humbl, Humbl, right?
That's right. That's me. I mean, I'm happy to share. I really enjoy sharing all the news that comes out, and I like communicating with people there. So feel free to follow me. I think, let's see, the fourth industrial revolution, that's what Forbes is calling blockchain. So I think that's just really exciting to participate in something that's globally innovative and is a digital transformation unlike anything we've seen in this country, let alone the rest of the world. So glad to be on this journey with the Humbl Nation.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because that, you know, it really is something else. I'm amazed at how much we learn when we invest, and the whole idea of blockchain. And even if you don't understand it, you're participating in it instead of standing outside and letting other things take off, and you're not, you know, you don't have to understand how an elevator works to be able to go up with it. I'd say if you invest in Humbl and it's involved in all that it is, don't put money in you can't afford to, don't put money in you need to pay the rent with. Put money in you can afford to keep in there. If you buy 100 shares, you're still going to have 100 shares, whether it's $1 a share, $5 a share, or $10 a share. You're still going to own 100 shares. So buy what you can afford to keep, and then let it ride and see where it goes. It would be my suggestion over the next 3 to 5 years. And don't be so discouraged on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis. You got to take a longer view. I know Rebecca and I were talking off screen, and we both agreed that that's, if eventually I know I'm going to get where I'm going, I'm not going to worry about every pothole in the road along the path.
Exactly. I agree.
Rebecca,
just go on a walk on those red days.
Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you on Twitter, and hopefully we can do this again. I hope you're enjoying a great spring in Georgia.
I sure am. Good to see you.
All right, take care.
Bye.